We regret to announce that episode 115 of NES Works has been boycotted by the USSR.
Oh yeah? How would you like a Vulcan death grip?
This week we have two separate takes on the same concept. Tiny, micro-sized versions of Olympic events defined by arbitrary mechanics, controls, and objectives. Fun! Of the two, Konami's Track and Field 2 takes the much more serious approach. It's a demonstration of the absolute mastery Konami has achieved over the NES hardware and their increasingly sophisticated aesthetics and design chops. On the other hand, it's a lot less whimsical than their older work. Honestly, you could sense the sea change lurking even back in the original Track and Field, 2 years before this one shipped to stores. The American Track and Field combined content from two different Famicom releases, Hyper Sports and Hyper Olympic, while also incorporating a few new events. The new additions stood out in 1987 because they read as a lot more serious in terms of character design than the older games did, replacing the goofy little men with Magnum PI porn stashes found in Hyper Olympic with more normal-looking adults. Well, Track and Field 2 goes all in on the more serious look. All 12 events here look as detailed and sophisticated as anything to have appeared on the NES to date, with massive sprites of athletes competing in a variety of sports, surrounded by stylish menus and heads-up interfaces. You can really see Konami applying everything they've learned about this console here, in a collection of sports minigames. Honestly, Track and Field 2 amounts to little more than an expanded redux of the first game when you reduce it down to its basics, but it looks so slick and stylish that it feels fresh. Note that fresh doesn't necessarily mean perfect. Track and Field 2 certainly has an eye-catching presentation, but the 12 events here vary wildly in quality, depth, and appeal, not unlike the events in the previous iterations of the series. As usual for this format, every event controls differently, has distinct objectives, and demands you come into each event knowing exactly what to do and how to do it if you hope to have the merest chance of success. Perform below expectations or fail to realign your gray matter to connect with a new interface every minute or two, and you won't make much progress. And compared to the first Track and Field, these minigames are incredibly difficult, even if you've taken the time to learn how they work. The previous game became the stuff of playground legend, for the way that it encouraged kids to devise creative ways to perform rapid-fire functions, such as the old dual-button spoon trick. Well, in between the two games' debut, Nintendo released the NES Advantage, a controller with rapid-fire features built right in. That sound you hear isn't the Konami pause jingle, it's the sound of an Overton window shifting. Where the first Track and Field worked under the assumption that players would be using the basic NES controller, or in Japan, a highly bespoke buttons-only controller, and that anyone who could bodge together some sort of rapid input system would have an edge, Track and Field 2 operates under a different standard. Konami clearly designed this game around readily available rapid-fire options, and that's the new baseline here for most events. Don't have an NES Advantage? Well, buddy, you can just forget about placing in pretty much any event that requires filling a meter with speedy button inputs, which is most of them. The triple jump? Unless you're Takahashi Meijin, you can forget about building up enough speed to make qualifying leaps without a turbo controller. Freestyle swimming? Forget about it, fumble fingers. The pole vault? Like hell you'll get anywhere. The hammer throw? It is to laugh. Even archery has changed this time around to all but demand automated button mashing. In the older game, archery really just demanded timing and an intuitive sense of aim. Here though, you need to hammer the A button to draw, while adjusting your aim to counter the force of crosswinds. The target moves further and further back from your position every few shots, and by the time you reach 70 meters, you really don't stand a chance of generating enough draw power to reach the target without building up your meter. I don't know, maybe it's just me slowing down with age, but I had zero luck with most of these meter-filling events. The other minigames here aren't exactly earth-shatteringly awesome either. I do appreciate the variety Konami has incorporated into the events in Track and Field 2, but all of them feel pretty shallow and limited compared to a proper game, which is fair enough because there's a baker's dozen of the things here. But take fencing as an example. You and your competitor face off with a limited selection of commands. You can move forward, dart backward, slash high, thrust low, and parry. Trying to approach this sport tactically doesn't work. The computer seemingly reads your inputs and blocks your incoming slashes, yet doesn't telegraph its actions in a way that you can easily counter. On the other hand, if you duck low and jam the attack button for a constant string of thrusts, unbeatable offense. It's not especially compelling in terms of gameplay, but you do have to respect the fact that it paved the way for Ryu's unstoppable low short attack in Street Fighter II. The events that break from the standard format a little more dramatically seem to work best. Oh, and clay pigeon shooting, which offers a more refined approach to target shooting than in the first game. Rather than simply pulling the trigger when the skeets happen to line up with your cursor, here you freely move the targeting reticle left and right to track and break the clay targets. You get 2 shots per target, and the event emphasizes precision over button mashing with the bandit. Likewise, the surprisingly involved canoeing event works well once you get the hang of it. You press buttons to row forward, but here you don't want to hammer the action button. You'll have much better results if you take a slower, more methodical approach. Otherwise, you're likely to get hung up on the scenery. Oh, and barreling ahead at full speed also doesn't leave you a lot of maneuvering room to reverse your canoe for the gates that you need to pass through while moving backward. And of course, you have the usual acrobatic contests that judge you based on some inscrutable interpretation of form, which you can either attempt to master or mash buttons and hope for the best with. You have about equal odds of success either way. Finally, just to put this package over the top, Track and Field 2 also offers an arm wrestling mode that you can only access through 2-player mode. It's also about button mashing, but there are no turbo cheats in this contest. In short, Track and Field 2 suffers from the same shortcomings as every other game of this type. See also the earlier entries in the series, Winter Games, and so forth. Which is to say that it plays like a collection of half-formed game ideas that don't quite stand up to individual scrutiny. The shotgun blast presentation, I think, is meant to wallpaper over that issue, but it still doesn't quite come together. Track and Field 2 does have the decency to offer a practice mode, allowing you to partake of any minigame event at will in your attempts at mastery. And good thing too, because without practice mode, you'd never have a prayer of seeing the full game. Konami went all out with the presentation of Track and Field 2 for its competition mode. The American version files off the Olympic trademarks, but it still manages to get the idea across, with a framing device that places players in the press room between events to report on the outcome of the current contest. You pick a country, then follow its athletes through a few days, or is it weeks? I don't know, I didn't get that far, of competition, tackling a handful of events per day. Once the games begin, you sit through a string of opening ceremonies before leaping into the events, running in sequence from the beginning, which is to say, fencing. In order to advance beyond the current day, you need to qualify in each event. Not necessarily earn a medal, merely qualify. Though the requirements for qualification are so stringent that you'll probably end up taking a prize if you actually manage to pass. If you fail to qualify across the board, you wash out and have to start back from the beginning. It's kind of harsh. However, in a small but welcome nod to modernity, this game does at least include a password feature. You can record the code you receive at the end of each successful day and use it to begin your next session at a subsequent day upon your inevitable failure to qualify down the road. It's a technically impressive game boasting all of the stellar audio-visual design you'd expect from Konami. That almost makes up for the fact that at heart, it frankly plays like a gussied-up version of an arcade and computer game from 5 years earlier. Speaking of release dates, Track and Field 2 suffers from another case of launch uncertainty that plagues NES software from this era. This can be chalked up in part to a combination of nebulous distribution of the medium in the 80s and non-existent efforts by publishers to actually document these details, but also to the fact that manufacturing resource issues really dogged the industry for a while. I've mentioned the NES chip shortage before. It resulted in Zelda 2 slipping from a spring 1988 debut in America to December of that year. Likewise, Konami originally promoted an October 88 release date for Track and Field 2, which definitely didn't happen. Online sources pin it down to either March or June 1989. I've grouped it here since a full review of the actual retail release shows up in the April 1989 issue of Computer Entertainer magazine. Either way, I feel like the delay must have hurt the game's performance in the US a bit. In Japan, Track and Field 2 shipped in June 88 as Konami Sports in Seoul, a tie-in to the year's Summer Games, which actually happened that autumn. If Track and Field 2 had hit American retail with its original release date, it would have landed smack in the middle of the Seoul Games, right in the thick of Olympics mania. Landing right alongside Track and Field 2, and therefore missing the window of American interest in all things Olympian, we have Milton Bradley's second release for NES, a console conversion of World Games by Epyx. Like Marble Madness, World Games comes to us with a development assist by our pals at Rare. And not unlike Marble Madness, it really radiates Rare's personality. World Games belongs to the same Epyx-developed faux Olympics series that gave us Winter Games, which of course we've already seen here on NES Works. Debuting back in 1987, Winter Games arrived via Acclaim, with development by Atelier Double, and a quick comparison of the two speaks highly for Rare. Rather than simply attempt a direct conversion of the fairly staid graphics found in the 1986 C64 release of World Games to NES, the way Atelier Double did with Winter Games, Rare added some unique touches to their work here. Although the look of this game doesn't stray too far from the PC-based original, NES World Games cranks the cartoonish personality from, say, a 4 to a 7. It also makes an interesting contrast to Track and Field 2, where Konami presented a very stylish take on the multimedia experience of the Olympic broadcasts. Rare, building on Epyx's original work, went for a looser, more whimsical feel. It doesn't particularly hew to the actual Olympics, presenting players with game events like log rolling, caber tossing, and sumo wrestling. The idea is less about competitors from around the world squaring off for supremacy, and more about getting a combo appetizer platter of international sports events, from American bull riding to Mexican cliff diving. Every game has its own look and style, ranging from the fairly straight-laced approach of bull riding, where the humor comes more from the names of the bulls you can attempt to tame, to the pure comedy of caber tossing. I mean, make no mistake, World Games suffers from the same varied, fragmentary control schemes and objectives of any game in this format. But you don't mind as much thanks to, say, the fact that failing to come to terms with the caber toss's mechanics results in your beefy Scotsman hopping away in pain after dropping a 13-stone log on his foot, or even being hammered into the ground like a nail after fumbling the caber onto his own head. And as with Track and Field 2, World Games gives you a practice mode in order to allow you to play each event freely until you figure it out or just give up. Some of them, such as weightlifting, continue to baffle me even after reading the manual and farting around in practice. This game's objectives can be, shall we say, opaque. Still, you have to love the presentation here. It lacks the crisp, cutting-edge professionalism of Konami's work, but its energetic chaos has an appeal all its own. And if you leave the travelogue option active, every event treats you to a little explanation of its real-world roots and legacy. It's kind of like the video game equivalent of Disney World's International Food Court, a breezy, lightweight sampler of sports from a variety of different countries. Truth be told, of the two games, I think I kind of like World Games more. That's certainly a plot twist I didn't expect. What did Nintendo Power have to say about World Games? Well, they appear to have been considerably less impressed than I was. The game got a teeny tiny mention in issue 1, followed by a half-page box out in issue 4, and that's pretty much it. Track and Field 2, on the other hand, garnered a lot more notice. Not only did it show up in a Fun Club news ad boasting about its non-existent October 1988 release, it also quite surprisingly landed the cover feature for Nintendo Power issue 3. This lengthy feature really just amounted to a brief explainer of how to play each in-game event, with no real strategies or info that you couldn't just find in the manual. I do enjoy the Winston Cigarettes ad-looking artwork that adorns each page though. Still, it's one of Nintendo Power's more lightweight cover features from the early days of the magazine. My theory is that it happened because the Nintendo Power team had to scramble to find a replacement cover subject when Zelda 2 got hit with yet another delay and had to be pushed to issue 4. And someone in the editorial office realized that issue 3 would hit concurrently with the Seoul Olympics, even if the game didn't. But who knows the truth? I mean, aside from the Nintendo Power editorial team, but it's not like I'm going to bother them about it. I mean, why would they feel the need to justify their actions for an obscure little YouTube series about NES games? Next time on NES Works, look out little furry folk, he's the all-night working cat.